Okie doke. So up in the upper left-hand corner is Joseph. He's our instructor today. Excuse me. He has a master's in sociology and has taught statistics and sociology at Golden State West University out here in California. He recently moved to Missouri, where he works with troubled youth. Today, he's going to help us understand the ins and outs of the new pronouns for a discussion and a Q&A on who, she, they, them are, and how to understand how to use them. That's a mouthful. Oh, darn. There's a couple of housekeeping things I'd like to talk about first before we start. Please mute yourself if you're not asking a question. Also, he would rather you hold the questions until the end for reasons that he'll explain. So feel free to use the reactions in chat if you need to. Lastly, in the chat, I hope you check it. I've listed multiple ways to complete the course evaluation form for this class. And those are invaluable because it tells us what you like and it gives the speaker feedback. So please take the time to deal with one of the three options. One is a QR code. You can just, you can just flash your phone up to it. The other is a Zoom link, it's a link. And the third is actually a Word document that you can download that has both of them in it. And you can use that for any class. So here we go. Let's turn it over to Joseph.
Thank you very much, Linda. As just an extension of Linda pointing out that I wanted to hold all questions until later in the presentation, I had assumed that there were going to be more people, but since this is more of like a small group, then I think it's fine if you have questions to feel free and just raise your hand and I'll stop and answer them. Some of the questions might be answered by further slides, but if there's something that you need me to clarify or go back and explain again, feel free to interrupt me. It's not a very long PowerPoint, but I do plan on covering a bit of background before we get to pronouns. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'm going to start sharing my screen right about now. Okay, can everybody see my screen okay? Mm-hmm. Awesome. There we go. And is it full screen for everyone? Great. So pronouns. Today we're going to go over a bit of background before we get onto the topic of pronouns. I'm going to give you an overview of the differences between sex, gender, and gender expression. Then we're going to start on the basics of pronouns. After that, we will discuss some pronouns etiquette. After that, we will discuss some pronouns etiquette and then some strategies for inclusion on how to be inclusive of people that use pronouns that might be different than what you expect. The very last thing we'll have is some resources, and I will be sharing this PowerPoint presentation with your presenters today so that they can share it with you for some further education after we're done. So with that said, let us jump right into it. So the first thing that we're going to want to talk about is the differences between sex, gender, and gender expression, because there was a sort of foundational to how pronouns are being used in conversation today, how they're coming more onto the stage of people wanting to know what people's pronouns are, how do you use different pronouns. So pronouns have traditionally been assumed to correspond with someone's sex or gender. For a very long time, somebody could assume that if someone looks like what you would assume as a man, his pronouns are he, him, his. If somebody looks like what you would assume a woman to be, her pronouns are her, she, and hers. But pronouns and sex and gender are, while they're related, they're not all the same thing. So sex and gender sometimes get conflated with each other, but they're not exactly the same. Sex refers to the biological characteristics that are decided by chromosomes. And what I mean by that is, what I mean by chromosomes is typically reproductive organs, whether that's breasts, penises, testes, uterus, the shape of a person's body. Those are those biological physical characteristics that are determined by sex. Gender, on the other hand, refers to the social, cultural, and behavioral norms that we learn from various social institutions. We learn them from our parents, we learn them from school, we learn them from our peer groups, from music, TV, movies, video games. So while sex is something that we have from the moment we're born, gender is assigned to us by typically our parents, could be guardians. Let's see. So going back to biological sex for a second, a lot of people learn in school that if you have two X chromosomes, you're a woman. If you have an X and a Y chromosome, that means you're a man. But biological sex is a lot more complicated than that. People that are intersex might not necessarily have just an XX or an XY chromosome. Intersex people are a lot more common than you would expect. For reference, the probability of having green eyes or red hair is about 2% of the population. So 2 in 100 people have red hair. The possibility of being intersex is just about the same. And intersex is could be 3 X chromosomes. It could be 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome. It could be just an X chromosome. There are people that were identified as male when they were born. They were assigned the male gender when they were born. They have a penis, no breasts, and didn't discover until late in their 50s that they only had an X chromosome and were born with an underused uterus. It didn't affect their health at all, but it just meant that their bodies weren't what we would typically assume to be male bodies. So the diversity of chromosomes is a lot more common than you would expect. So going back to gender being assigned at birth, most oftentimes parents will have a baby and then they will see, okay, this baby does not have a penis, so this baby is a girl. We're going to call her she, her. We're going to raise her with the norms that girls are raised with, such as, girls are supposed to speak a certain way, they're supposed to dress a certain way, they're not supposed to do certain things, they are supposed to do other things. Everybody has gender expectations that they're raised with as children. Those gender norms might change over time, but some things are pretty common, if that makes sense. Oftentimes, gender and the sex that we're born with are compatible. I'd say the vast majority of people in history have been born with a set of genitals, been assigned a gender by their parents at birth, and they go throughout their entire lives not having any problem or any sense of discomfort with the fact that they were assigned that gender. That's not always true, and that's what's led to the sort of recent, maybe not so recent, the more recent awareness of the wider community of gender diversity and pronoun diversity and biological sex diversity. But there's a good chance that if you're born today, the gender that you're assigned is the one that you'll feel comfortable with your whole life. But that's not true for everyone. So cisgender versus transgender. Cisgender is something that a lot of folks might not be familiar with as a term. I'll just start off with saying it's not an insult. It's not a derogatory term. It's all it is a term that means that you as a person identify with the gender that you were assigned with at birth. So cisgender just means that if your parents had you and they think you're a boy, you grow up being a boy, you get into adulthood, you're now a man. The concept of you being a man and people referring to you as a man doesn't bother you at all. Transgender, on the other hand, means that along the way, the gender that you were assigned at birth becomes uncomfortable. It might be painful. It might be something that you just don't identify with at all. And we don't really have the time today to go into a really in-depth analysis of what being transgender means. But it is sort of one of the foundational topics that relates to why pronouns are so important. Any questions so far? Okay. So the transgender umbrella is that gender isn't always straightforward. Transgender, like I said, just means that you don't identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. Some transgender individuals want to physically transition to have their bodies reflect what they feel is associated with their gender. Not all trans individuals want to physically transition, and that's fine. But being trans just means that we might not use the pronouns that somebody would look at someone and say, oh, these are the pronouns that I would use for somebody who looks like you. But I'm sort of skipping ahead with that. We'll get to the point where we'll cover when it's better to just ask what people's pronouns are. So breaking the binary, referring to male versus female, opposite genders, opposite sexes. Gender is a lot more than just a spectrum where there's male on one end, female on the other, and then transgender is somewhere in between. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Some of the gender neutral or non-binary genders that you might have heard of. The first one might be just straight up non-binary. Somebody doesn't identify with the gender binary at all. There's agender, where somebody doesn't feel like they have any gender at all. Gender fluid is a term for people that sometimes feel like they associate with one gender, and then maybe later in the day or a few days later, they associate with a different gender. There's a lot more genders than that in terms to describe people's experiences. And I've included some links at the end of the slide that can go more deep into that. Non-binary genders are not just something that we have here in the US. There's a long and very rich history in other countries of cultures really celebrating third genders or genders other than strictly male or female. Mujer is one such in Mexico that for centuries has been a widely celebrated gender. Two-spirit is a term that you might have heard before. There are some Native American tribes or indigenous tribes that believe in a two-spirit where male and female spirit both reside in the same body. Hijras are Hindu third gender and very widely celebrated in India and other countries. And those are just some of the ones that are more commonly known outside of the US. So gender expression. And this is the one that really ties into pronoun usage. Gender expression is the way that we express our gender for other people to perceive. So there's a lot of different things that go into the way we express our gender, and a lot of it is not something that we even think about day to day. especially if you are cisgender, because it's something that you've grown up with doing. It's very familiar to you, and you do it sort of automatically without thinking. Things that go into our gender expression is clothing. You know, you go to any store that sells clothing and there's going to be a men's section and a women's section. Mannerisms, how you walk, how you might gesticulate when you talk, the way you sit down, the way you shake a hand with somebody. Those things are all part of what we would use to sort of interpret how we perceive other people's gender when we meet them. Wearing makeup or not wearing makeup also goes into how we express our gender. Language. I'm sure if you saw a group of what you perceive to be men talking to each other like, "Hey girl, how you doing?" You would assume certain things about their gender and their sexuality strictly based on how they're talking. And then body modifications, whether that's earrings, the way that people cut their hair, the way they style their hair, tattoos, things like that. Those can all go into how we want to express our gender. Gender does not always match with the way that we express it. So what that means is people might present a certain way for their own safety. They might present a certain way because they're afraid of losing their job, or because they're in an area where it's not really appropriate for them to present as the gender that they identify with. And so that's another reason that it's usually better to ask. So some examples of this, and in 2022, it's not really a huge deal, but even 30 years ago, women in business suits would be looked at as like, what are you doing in men's clothing? And they most likely were not transgender. They're just women who disliked having to wear dresses in court. Men wearing aprons. I know the rise of shows like Chopped and Cutthroat Kitchen have really highlighted that there's a lot more men working in the food service industry, but for a large portion of US history, women were considered to be the authority in the kitchen. So seeing a man wearing an apron might give you certain ideas about that person's gender. Drag queens. Drag queens and drag queen culture typically refers to drag queens as she, her. But I think the entire point of drag queens is the fact that there are men dressed as women putting on makeup for the purpose of entertainment. So these are some examples of how the way people look might not have anything to do with what their gender is. So one thing that comes up a lot is non-binary or gender fluid and androgyny. For those that don't know, androgyny just is meaning that you can't really tell a person's gender based on how they look. People seem to think that if somebody is dressed like what we perceive to be a man or what we perceive to be a woman, that they can't be non-binary. But dressing a certain way or behaving a certain way doesn't really have anything to do with what somebody's gender is. So pronouns, the basics. I've got a video here that's very short, and it's about 5 minutes long, and this is going to cover some of the basics. After we watch the video, then I'm going to go into more deeply into some of the points that they addressed. Can y'all hear any sound from this video?
No.
Well, that's not good. Let's see if it'll open up on YouTube. Retro. Hmm. Well, okay, that didn't seem to work.
Hmm.
Well, that's fine, because I'm prepared to talk about the subjects in the video anyway.
You can turn on closed captions. They were there.
That is a good point. Let's see, subtitles.
So when you click on the speaker icon down at the bottom, it doesn't, oh, it's already all the way up, okay.
Hi, Anissa.
That was Angelina.
Oh, sorry.
Can you all see the subtitles on this?
Mhm.
Are we supposed to be hearing something?
We're not able to get the volume to work, but we are trying to see if people can follow along with the closed captions. If that's not a good way, then we can just skip over the video and I can go over the topics.
I say you go over them.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So the first topic that came up in that video, and I'll send y'all the link to the video afterwards too, is third person. So pronouns are really basically the way that we refer to people when they're not right in front of us. So for example, I might be talking to somebody about Fawn and say, oh yeah, I spoke to her yesterday. We had a great conversation. She's going to follow up with an email to me later. Some people might not understand that they have pronouns or that they need to use pronouns, but everybody uses pronouns every day when speaking about people that aren't right there. Gender neutral pronouns are pronouns that reflect the wide variety of gender diversity. So sometimes when people don't identify as male or female, they don't want male or female pronouns being used for them. So instead of referring to somebody as he when I'm speaking about them, I might refer to them as them. People think that it can get a little awkward speaking like that, but a great example is, let's say a woman, or what you assume is a woman, left her purse or left a purse in a restaurant. Somebody sees that somebody just left and there was a purse there, so they run up to a waiter and say, hey, whoever was just eating at this table left their purse. I think that they just left. If you hurry up, you might just be able to catch them. So that's an example of singular they and them using pronouns that are gender neutral, because the person speaking didn't know what the gender was of the person who had just left the purse or the bag. Neopronouns, new pronouns, are pronouns that people might struggle with because while a lot of people have heard of he, she, or they haven't heard of je, je, sie, zir, or fe, fer. There's a link towards the end of the slides that will teach you about neopronouns as well. But neopronouns are used just like regular pronouns. The only difference is learning what the different pronunciations are. So misgendering is what happens when you refer to somebody with pronouns that don't go with their gender. We do it all the time when we talk about people's pets. You might cross somebody in the street that's got a dog, and you go, "Oh, she's so adorable. Can I pet her?" And the person with the dog might respond to you very casually and just say, "Sure, yeah, you can totally pet him." That's a great example of somebody correcting your use of pronouns. And I don't really know personally of anyone that when corrected on a dog or a cat's pronouns will refuse to use the correct pronouns. And really what it boils down to with pronouns is it's about respect. Putting forth the effort to use somebody's pronouns demonstrates basic respect for them as a person. You don't have to be perfect at it. And you don't have to know everything there is to know about pronouns in order to know that if somebody says, "Hey, these are my pronouns," that just using them provides the basic respect that we would expect from anybody else to give us. So grammar fun fact, a lot of people don't like using gender neutral pronouns because they think that they and them can't be used singularly. In fact, the singular they is older than singular you. Singular you wasn't even common in the late 17th century. And in fact, there were several authors who wrote scathing, what we would now call clickbait articles, about the fact that people weren't using thou or thee and instead were using you. The first recorded instance of singular they comes from an English translation of a poem by William of Blerne, and that's from the late 14th century. So pronouns etiquette. Like I've mentioned before, in terms of gender expression, visual indications of what we might think is somebody's gender is not necessarily an assurance of what pronouns you should use for them. Especially because some people are in the closet about their gender, about their sexuality, about the pronouns that they would like for you to use. And so it's best practices to just always ask rather than assume. Non-binary people, especially somebody that you might assume is a man or a woman, might not want you to use those kinds of pronouns for them. And when I say that non-binary people don't owe androgyny, what that means is people shouldn't have to dress a certain way where it's obvious that you can't tell what their gender is in order for you to automatically use gender neutral pronouns. So asking for pronouns, something that a lot of well-intentioned people will say is, "What are your preferred pronouns?" It's best not to ask for preferred pronouns and just ask for pronouns in general, because asking for somebody's preference implies that if you don't want to follow their preference, that their reality can be discarded. It also sort of implies that that's not what their pronouns actually are. That's just what they want you to use. So when asking for pronouns, you should just say, what are your pronouns, or what pronouns should I use for you? Misgendering. So if you accidentally misgender somebody, what do you do? The first key point is don't make a huge deal out of it. If you do make a huge deal out of it and just start profusely apologizing, you're making somebody's uncomfortable situation about you. And while it might be uncomfortable for you too, because you're not as familiar with what pronouns that you're supposed to use for them, really what it just boils down to is correct yourself and then just move on to the next topic. It's not the end of the world if you misgender somebody by accident. It's just a learning opportunity for you to use the correct pronouns and then move on. Believe me, anybody that you accidentally misgender will be more than happy for you to just change it and then keep going. So some strategies for inclusion and how you can introduce pronouns in everyday use is when you introduce yourself to somebody new, Introduce yourself with your pronouns. Hi, my name is Joseph. My pronouns are he, they. When you're in meetings, make a habit at the beginning of meetings with everyone stating their names and their pronouns. It doesn't need to be a huge ordeal. You can just start it off with, hi, my name is Joseph. My pronouns are he, they. Next person. If it's people you work with all the time, you might get badges that people can put their pronouns on so that if they meet somebody new, then it's obvious what pronouns that they can use. Emails. I'm very excited to see this becoming much more common, is including your pronouns in your email signature and on business cards if you're able to. Just asking. So if you need to refer to somebody unfamiliar, ask them what pronouns you should use for them. And lastly, just be open. Be open to the idea that you won't know for sure until you ask. It's always better to ask than to assume, because even if it's an accidental misgendering, you don't want to deal with that. They don't want to deal with that. It's better to know for sure. So at the end of the slide that I'm going to share with Linda and Vaughn to send to you is resources for further learning. So I've got a few links for pronouns with a lot more in-depth information. Some for more education on biological sex and chromosomes and that kind of diversity. And then some on gender. So you can learn more about just the binary gender, non-binary gender, resources to learn more about transgender. And that's it.
Nice.
So what questions do we all have?
I have a question.
Sure.
If you could tell me, I guess old school, we were always taught that you was universal, that didn't make any difference. You was universal. I was also taught that he and the pronoun his or just he referred to mankind. There was no identification as to sexes. I want to know if that has changed at all. And the third thing is, I want to know how the pronouns are assigned to objects. Usually when someone is talking about ships or anything like that, they always use female. And I was wondering to certain objects, you know, she sank, she in her bowels and things like that. I wanted to know if there's a history of that, why that is so.
Gotcha. I'm writing these questions down, so I'll be able to answer them all.
Okay, Delina has her hand raised. Do you want to go, Delina?
And unmute yourself, Delina.
Yes, my question is, this is language is an evolution, right? And so this seems more like a revolution when you're talking about the genders. No, seriously, I'm not trying to be funny about it. It's because I'm wondering how widespread the use of these new terminologies are. I get this because I'm a foreign language instructor, and when I teach pronouns, I get students who want to know, well, what do they say in Spanish, or what do they say in French? And I'm just wondering, is this a construct of is this an American construct, or how much of an influence do we have on other countries with these new terminologies, and what would it look like in the other languages?
Those are all, Gloria, Delina, those are all great questions. I'm gonna go in order here, answering Gloria's questions first, but that was a very good question too, Delina.
Okay.
So Gloria, you the first thing you mentioned was the you being universal.
Yes.
And I think that's still true. I know you living in the Midwest now. there's a lot more. Instead of you, I get you all or y'all. And that's honestly my preferred way of addressing large groups of people. And that really sort of ties into your second question about your question about he being referred to as like mankind or humankind in general. Is one of the common ways of addressing large groups of people is usually like, hey guys, or you guys,
Right.
because and part of that comes from the fact that and honestly Fawn could answer this a lot better than I could, because she's the linguist here, but English especially has roots in a lot of other languages, and most other languages do have words that are gendered. So there's words that you would conjugate differently if somebody who was male was speaking them versus female. And so in a lot of those languages with gendered words, the male is taken to be universal. So the male version of those words. And a lot of that is bled over into English. And so that's why things like addressing groups of people that have all kinds of genders in them as you guys is taken to be pretty common. One of the reasons that I like saying, hey, y'all, is because y'all does not refer to anybody's gender, but it is still a way of getting the attention of everybody that you're trying to speak to.
Wow, I see.
Go ahead.
Okay, and the objects too, like the
Yep.
ship. Okay.
So that ties into a lot of cultural norms. So Delina mentioned that language does evolve, or in this case, a revolution. Culture does not advance as fast as technology does. And so there's things that are traditional in cultures that might not necessarily reflect other changes in cultures that are happening concurrently. So as more people become comfortable sort of branching out from the gender binary, there's a lot more terminology used to explain the way people feel, the way people experience reality, the way they identify. And that language doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily working well retroactively. So referring to cars and ships and lots of other pieces of machinery as female has its roots in sort of the mentality of women and things that are considered female being objects. And that's less to do with pronouns, though we do use female pronouns to refer to those objects, and more to do with the sense of male ownership over those objects. And so you're right that a lot of people do refer to cars, to boats as she. They give them female names because then it's socially acceptable for those men to love those objects, sometimes more than their wives. But so it's still something that happens. It's very common. I can't give you any kind of estimate for when or if that'll ever change.
Okay.
But you're right in that it is those we do use female pronouns for lots of objects like that.
Okay.
I would add that it takes much longer for it to become a rule than it does a rule that we are using, because it's one of those things that it's kind of like the wait and see. Let's see if it sticks for long enough to make it an actual rule. So that's it takes time. It takes, because it's changing the way that we use language. So it might start with maybe our kids that it just becomes natural for them. And but we might not ever actually get there until our kids are old enough where it's just that's now the new rules that are written down, and it's just there's no other way. It's just there.
Right. Okay, Don has a hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I came into this class with the question of, if you and I are talking about someone else, why would we use their pronoun? And you pointed out in the very beginning, it's all about respect, which takes the question in a different direction. If it's all about respect, why hasn't there been development of pronouns for you and me? Because you are talking to the person.
Good question. So before I've written that down, so I'm going to come back to that in just a sec, Don. Before I answer that, I want to address Delina's question about pronouns in other languages. That's a really good question, Don. So to sort of address your question, Delina, as best as I can, because while I do speak another language, I don't speak a lot of like the Latin languages. So I will start off by saying that I know there are movements within those languages to sort of abolish the use of gendered language in general, or at least the universal he. I can't really answer as to gender neutral terms for pronouns or gender neutral language in general in those languages, because I don't have that information. But that is a really good question. And I know that there is some movement in that direction, but I don't know how widespread it is. And I don't know, I can't speak with any kind of authority on the people that are leading those movements. So I know there.
I just know we have to anticipate a lot of pushback, because we're getting it. You know, you get it with everything. When different ethnicities decided to rename themselves, there was pushback. So there's always going to be pushback whenever you have a new concept, and it seems like you said, like Ron said, it's a generational thing.
Did we lose her?
Are you still there, Delina?
Delina, they can't hear you. You're too far away from them.
I can sort of hear you there for a second.
Yes, stand up.
She's in a car.
Finish, Delina, finish your thought over here. Hold on one second.
Sure.
I have a thought, I can't remember it now, but no, I'm wondering who's going to enforce it, because it seems like it's a generational thing. In the school system, for example, I'm looking at a first grade teacher, all the first grade teachers, are they going to say, I'm going to teach you about pronouns? Or is it something like word of mouth, or is it social media? I mean, where is this being learned right now? Because like I said, the people in my generation are not in school, and they're looking at the news, and they're reading.
Some of you are in school.
Well, yeah, that's true, but they're looking at they have their own habits so far, and societal norms are dictating what we learned, and it's kind of hard to unlearn things like that. So I'm just wondering, how is that going to play out without a lot of pushback?
Good question. So to address the first point, with schools, schools are very complicated places for education, especially K through 12, where school board districts have a lot more power, and depending on what state or even county within that state you live in, there could be some very regressive politics that sort of dictate what can and can't be taught. But to address the second point, you're right, a lot of people are on social media, and there are organizations and individuals that utilize social media to pass along education or suggestions on how best to utilize certain practices, like which pronouns to use, when to use them, how to ask for pronouns. And in terms of that pushback, a lot of it starts with folks like y'all, part of the older generation that are taking courses like this online, and you might not agree with everything that you're hearing about, but you're at least being exposed to it. And that starts the conversation. You might discuss it with somebody else or a friend of yours, other classmates. And then next time something like pronouns comes up in conversation with other people that don't know anything about it at all, you might say, well, I learned something. This is what people are talking about or what they're saying. Whether or not you agree with it, in that certain case is irrelevant, because if you're sharing at least what you're hearing about the topic, then that means that other people are also hearing about it. And so that really starts the conversation in order so that the pushback can have I don't want to say an intelligent conversation about it, but a well-informed conversation, regardless of whether or not people agree with using pronouns a certain way.
Society that we're living in now. I just really feel for people who are trying to, use it, the different expressions,
Oh, you cut
all
out.
the implications like you were talking about. Oh,
You cut out for a
out.
second, third line.
I'm done.
Okay,
I better not monopolize this. Go ahead.
okay.
Thank you for the questions. So those were very good questions and very,
Thank you.
very valuable questions.
Can I
Okay.
offer an input on that one?
Sure.
I don't think, well, a lot of things in language and any other topic, it's just sort of, it just happens naturally. Like, for example, the word decimate. In classical education, decimate means reduce by a tenth. Latin, deci. But in common use, it means obliterate. It's like, for me, it's like fingernails on chalkboard. But everybody, it's developing so that a lot of people use decimate as obliterate. Now, the question is, who made the decision to change and how are they enforcing it? Don't know. It just happened.
Yeah,
That's that's a very good point that highlights how language evolves, regardless whether people want it to or not, even with just certain words. And so that's where we go from maybe 30, 40 years ago. Very few people use decimate in that way. And now lots of people use it in that way because it entered in conversations from lots of different places.
mhm,
I mean, if you look at Zoom, as 5 years ago, when somebody said, "Hey, I need to Zoom on something," you're thinking that they're grabbing a magnifying glass so that they could read, an old script better. Zoom is a very new company, but now it's so common that, when somebody says, "Hey, I got to Zoom," the first thought isn't, they're rushing off to somewhere, Zooming off somewhere. They're hopping onto a conference call that they'd rather not be on, or that could have been an email, so language can change very gradually, over the course of decades or centuries. It can also change very rapidly. 20 years ago, Googling something wasn't a verb. Google wasn't even a company. Several years later, Google was the premier search engine in the world, and now they've got their grip around the entire knowledge base of pretty much the globe. So language evolves to accommodate technological advances, but whether or not the culture that people live in advances to accommodate the language is a whole nother story. To answer your original question about whether you or me evolving in conversation, you evolved about 400 years ago. It used to be if the two of us were in conversation and I wanted to refer to you, I would say thou. But in terms of how it might change with pronouns, because you and me are both pronouns, I don't personally foresee them changing very much anytime in the near future because you and me aren't gendered pronouns. So when it's just two people in conversation, there's not really a need to accommodate anybody else because those pronouns don't refer to anyone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Of course.
I have a question as well, which you may have answered it and I just missed it. You mentioned that the plural of he and she would be them.
Depends on the situation. Can you
Okay,
give me an example?
no, but I can tell you why it's confusing me. Because later you said he would go, someone might say that they are a he, them, they. And so they is plural, but he is singular.
Gotcha. I remember what you're referring to.
Good, I
So
don't.
so I use myself as an example, and I use both he, him, his pronouns, and they, them, theirs, because I personally am non-binary. But he, him pronouns don't bother me if you use them to refer to me. So when somebody might say that you can use he, they, or she, they, what they're saying is that you can use either this specific gender or gender neutral pronouns to refer to them. So not they in the form of being the plural of he, but they as like in addition to he.
Okay, that's going to take me some time to wrap my head around. Thank you.
Of course. These are really great questions. Keep them coming.
Okay, Fawn's hand is up too.
So when I meet somebody and I don't know yet, and it's just we're conversating, and it's not really the place to ask directly what is the neutral way of addressing.
Good question. So if you're just talking directly to somebody, then you is pretty much the only thing that would come up in conversation. When I mentioned when you're talking to somebody new and you might not know, like for example, so my work right now, I'm a social worker. And a lot of times when we have interviews with new clients, those clients might be accompanied by a case manager. And so sometimes when those case managers come in that I'm already familiar with, and they might clarify points that me and the client are talking about in the interview, I'll ask the client, hey, what pronoun should I use to refer to you if I'm talking about you? Sometimes they're comfortable sharing those, sometimes they're not. If they're not comfortable sharing, I ask them if it's okay to use gender neutral pronouns. So far, nobody has told me no. So I don't really have any advice to what to say if they say don't refer to me at all. You might just say the person sitting adjacent to me. But that's situations like that is what I meant when I was referring to, like if you're meeting somebody new and you don't know how to refer to them, that's if you need to refer to them in the third person. If it's just two people in a conversation, you're probably not going to be referring to them in the third person. Does that make sense?
Anybody else?
Just sometimes I wonder how to pronounce some of these pronouns when I see them.
You and me both. That's a totally natural reaction because a lot of I didn't really delve too deeply into neo-pronouns because I'm not as familiar with them as I probably should be. But there are a lot of helpful websites where if you type in how to pronounce and then you just type in the pronoun that you're trying to pronounce, they'll give you pronunciations that you can either hear, or there'll be an IPA if you're a linguist. But yeah, the pronunciation of neopronouns is something that I struggle with as well. So don't feel bad at all if you're struggling with those.
what is just a basic of the neo? I don't even get, this is my first time hearing of that.
So neopronouns aren't super common, at least as far as I'm aware. But I do know a few people that use them. And so like one of the examples was Zers, and I'm not even 100% sure I'm pronouncing that properly. And they're just like he, him, or his, or she, her, and hers. They're just a new type of pronoun, as opposed to using the ones that are already established. And people have created newer pronouns because they feel that those pronouns more accurately reflect the gender that they present. Just like we have new terms like gender queer or gender fluid to sort of express what people's genders experiences. Those new pronouns will sometimes correspond with those new gender terminologies.
And so do we know what the Z here is representing?
I don't.
Okay.
But there's somebody that might have a more comprehensive guide to that. Some of the links that are at the resources that I sent you have really I don't want to say exhaustive lists, but they do have comprehensive lists of neopronouns and how they might be used and where they might be appropriate. One thing I will say is that none of the resources or guides that you might find online are definitive. Language is constantly evolving, even day to day, and even something that I'm talking about now might be completely wrong, and I'm just unaware of it. So always best to just ask, because especially with pronouns and gender, nobody can explain their own experience and identity better than that person.
Okay, Don's hand is up again.
Oh, no, not me again.
You push the button.
Yeah, I know. Regarding pronunciation of pronouns, sort of like, how do you pronounce your last name? And there are people who are adamant about how you pronounce their last name, and people really don't care. As an example, my last name. My dad, his branch of the family says Putnik, rhyming with foot. My uncle pronounces it Putnik, as like putting a golf ball. Now, if we were in the old country, it would be Putnik. So, which is correct. It's in the, it's a matter of, does the person at the other end really care? Again, it's a matter of respect, but, you try your best, and if it's important to them, they'll correct you.
That's a great point. So for with Putnik, I would assume that it's probably Russian descent.
Serbian.
Or Serbian. Okay. Thanks for correcting me. Names are one of those things where it's really, some people might insist that it's supposed to be pronounced a certain way. I usually will, if somebody tells me that's the way to pronounce their name, that's how I'll pronounce it when I'm talking about them. But a great example for that is the author W.E.B. Du Bois. A lot of folks will insist that it's Du Bois, because that's how a lot of other famous people have pronounced it. But Du Bois insisted that his name was pronounced Du Bois, not Du Bois. Part of that might have come from wanting to resist French colonial pronunciation. But the fact is that if somebody referred to him as Du Bois, there's a good chance that he would have ignored them, because that's not his name. So for generally speaking, if you see somebody else in history with the last name spelled like that, you good chance that the pronunciation that they would have wanted is Du Bois. But if we're talking about WEB, it's Du Bois. So you're right, it is a matter of respect, especially when you're talking to the person whose name it is. But there's a million different ways to pronounce even names like Linda. That you know, if somebody wants to be offended, they're always going to find a reason to be offended. But if you're showing the individual the respect of pronouncing the name that they want it pronounced when you're talking about them, then I think you're fine. And I see Delina's got her hand up again.
Yeah,
I think that was a great analogy. I was going to use it for my first name, not just last names. I have a problem with my last name and my first name, but and it's
How do you
really
pronounce your last
irritating.
name?
It's Jope means.
Okay.
Jope is a West African name. And my ex-husband went along with the way that the Americans pronounced it because he didn't think that they could. So he would try to say it and then they would say it Diop. And so he went with it. I never did because I'm a stickler for pronunciation and language because that's my background. But my first name is Delina, and it really irritates me when people add an extra A to it, Delana. I don't understand it. So if I know I'm going to be around that person, I try to correct it. And you know, people in our like in my generation are older. If they get stuck on Delana, there's nothing I can do about it, and I just cringe every time I hear it. But I love that analogy that you just made about the respect part because it's almost like I feel so disrespected.
And that's a thank you for sharing that, first of all. And that's a really great point into how just really basic foundational things to people's identities can make people feel either great because you took the time and effort to learn the right pronouns or the right pronunciations of their names, or it can just make them feel terrible because you won't take 5 seconds to learn the correct pronunciation. And it is a struggle for somebody who might, maybe somebody met somebody who had a name spelled just like Delina's, and they insisted that it was supposed to be pronounced Delana. But Delina is not Delana. And I'm sorry, I'm assuming your pronouns are she. Is that correct?
Or it's not Delna, it's not Delma, it's not Delina. It's not any of those things that I was called all through my life. So
And that's a great point.
by
So the
teachers,
best.
by teachers.
Oh yeah, teachers are sometimes the I want to say worst perpetrators, not necessarily of any malice, but a lot of American teachers, regardless of color, might be more familiar with more anglicized names. And so they see names that are not very common and they go, I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation. Not all teachers, lots of teachers will see a name and they'll ask the student, hey, how do I pronounce this? Okay, if I mispronounce this, please correct me. But it's a common thing that happens to a lot of people. Their names become garbled because people don't take the time to learn the right pronunciation.
Yeah, experience with that would be when I taught international students, and the inability or not trying for some of us to pronounce their names correctly. Instead, they were asked to take on an American name. What do you want to call yourself here? And that to me is that's lazy on our part. That's not taking the time to learn who they are. And I've had students say, yeah, my instructor won't say my name, they just call me this. And we have to respect what they were born with, what they want.
And similar to, I'll throw in there that one of the reasons that it's important to ask about pronouns is because some especially young kids, but even older kids and teenagers might not be open and out about who they are at school, and so they might not give the correct name or the correct pronouns to their teachers, or maybe they tell their teachers in confidence, hey, when it's just the two of us, could you please refer to me this way? But in class, refer to me the way everybody expects me to be referred to. So just like with names, pronouns have a really strong direct impact on people's experiences and whether or not those experiences are positive or negative based on the effort that people are willing to put forth.
Right.
Cynthia, looks like you've got your hand up.
Oh, unmute yourself, Cynthia.
Oh, looks like you unmuted for a second there.
I was
I just unmuted her. Cynthia, do you have a question?
looks like she's still muted on my part.
Oh,
Let's see.
oh yeah, she's muted now. Huh.
Is it something that you're able to put in the chat, Cynthia, if you can't unmute yourself?
Oh, now it's not allowing me to unmute her. I don't know what's going on.
Here she is. Oh,
Got her?
no, she's in chat. Go ahead. You can ask your question there.
While Cynthia is writing out their question, I just wanted to say these have all been really phenomenal questions. I was half afraid that I would finish with the presentation and everybody would just be like, "All right, thanks, bye."
No, not this group.
But you've been a really phenomenal group.
Yeah, and you know, we've actually got a large number of people.
And it's actually helped highlight some things that I need to look into. Oh, good question. What does it mean when pronouns are next to a name on Zoom? Great question, Cynthia. So a lot of people might, and I realize I don't have them next to my name in Zoom, which I normally do. I think this is because this is a new Zoom organization that I'm joining in with. I usually put my pronouns next to my name in Zoom so that one, so that people know what my pronouns are, and two, so that if any of the people that are in the meeting need to refer to me, that they'll know what my pronouns are so that they can do so. A lot of times my personal preference when I don't know what someone's pronouns are is I try and use gender neutral pronouns to refer to someone in a Zoom chat like this. If people that are speaking aren't.
Oh, you froze.
Comfortable with using frozen.
Yeah. Oh, wait, you froze and okay.
I just got a pop-up that said my internet connection is unstable, which is really rude because I pay a lot of money for this internet. The joys of Spectrum, even 1,500 miles away. So it's going, just to repeat, because I don't know how much I froze for, having your pronouns next to your name in Zoom is similar to having your pronouns in your email signature or on your business cards. It just makes it accessible so that people that don't know how to refer to you will just easily know, okay, Fawn uses she, her pronouns, Joseph uses he or they pronouns. Myself included, a lot of people will use they, them, or just other gender neutral pronouns to refer to people if they don't know their pronouns. But it's also, if somebody might be referred to with gender neutral pronouns, And they'll go, why are you referring to me as they? I'm a woman. My pronouns are she, her. So it's just it's helpful to have your name, to have pronouns next to your name in Zoom, so that I can address you by the pronouns that you would want me to use. It's a really, really good question.
Actually, that's something we're asked to do now at part of our email signature. If we're comfortable with it, is supposed to include our pronouns.
And that's, you know,
or-
and that,
yeah. Sorry.
sorry, no, I interrupted you.
No.
And that's, you know, the more normalized it becomes, with people that are, especially with people that are cisgender, that is the gender that they were born with, utilizing pronouns and sharing their pronouns and asking pronouns, the more it creates a scenario where people that are not cisgender or that might have different pronouns feel more comfortable sharing their pronouns. Oh, I miss that doggy.
Aw. Okay, Delina has another question, but this time it's in chat. No?
Yeah, in chat. Yes.
So how do people figure out which pronoun matches them? Could someone with more expertise tell them that they're mistaken? So I'll address the second part of that first. No one can tell you what your pronouns are except for you. If somebody refers to you with pronouns that are not yours, that's misgendering. Lots of people do it by accident every day. If they do it intentionally, that's, forgive my language here, that's kind of an asshole move. The people that do that intentionally are trying to be malicious. I generally try and avoid those people. But no one but you can decide what your pronouns are. And then, so returning to the first part of your question, how to figure out which pronouns match you. The best way that I found really is just to experiment with different pronouns. If you think that the ones that you currently use aren't the best fit for you, you might ask a trusted friend or a trusted relative and say, hey, I'm thinking that I want to explore my gender, my pronouns a little bit. When you talk about me with other people that I trust, could you refer to me as she, as if you have used he, him pronouns, you might say, can you refer to me with she, her pronouns or they, them pronouns? And vice versa. If you traditionally use she, her pronouns, you might say, hey, can you refer to me with he, him pronouns or they, them pronouns or she, their pronouns? So it's not a fast process, especially for people that are exploring their gender or exploring different pronouns. But finding people that you trust, that you feel comfortable enough opening up about that with, and asking them to use different pronouns for you can be helpful. Sometimes you might find that, oh, okay, you know what? I don't like that. You just use the pronouns you've always used for me because those are fine. Or you might find, wow, those feels really affirming to hear you refer to me like that. I want to use these pronouns more regularly. There's no like definitive way of how best to explore which pronouns. You could also just talk to yourself, pretend you're in conversation with somebody and they're talking about you, and use different pronouns to refer to you. And see which ones kind of feel icky, which ones feel okay. That's how I would start off, I would say. That's a really good question.
Anybody else?
A great discussion.
Y'all have had some really, really phenomenal questions.
Anything else?
How comfortable is everybody with this? How many people are going to try to use this, do this?
I will try. It won't be easy.
Jeffrey, I want to hear, how about you?
It literally depends on the situation. So I'm with Delina. A lot of people in our age group don't recognize that. We can look at political affiliations and find that, one large group, that's a big no-no, period. And so depending on where you're at and who you're speaking to, it's different. Like for the university, I don't mind putting that on my university email. But my normal email at this time, I probably wouldn't, since I'm part of that 60s, 70s, 80s group, which half of them wouldn't even understand what I was doing and think something's wrong with me. So as Maya said, it will take time and evolve. And hopefully, if this holds, we'll know long after we're gone, to be truthful. But I want to say thank you to Joseph, because I was the one in the beginning. I wanted to know more about this, Joseph. One of our members has a son, and she did let me know. And I was curious, and I did ask them, and they gave me, I went online to Google and found a lot of information. But I wanted to know, and I thought it'd be good for our age group to experience and have someone like you come here and actually talk about it. Because there's probably a lot more curiosity than what we would admit, because it's new. And we'd like to know, especially those of us who have grandkids. It's what they're going through. We need to be aware so we don't mistreat them, by not knowing. So I appreciate this. And thank you, Fawn and the curriculum committee and Joseph.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always great when I get to talk about things like this with people that are willing to learn. I would say for those of you with kids or grandkids, they're probably a better resource than I am. I'm in my 30s now. I know I'm a baby compared to most of you, but especially I see some of I'm on TikTok a lot, and Fawn knows, and I see a lot of Gen Z and even Gen Alpha. For those of you that don't know, the youngest generation is Gen Alpha. That's the thing now. That's so they're finding new ways to talk about their gender and their pronouns and the way that they identify in the sort of complex reality that we live in. And a lot of times the best source to go to for questions like this is those grandkids, because they're going to have the most up-to-date information. But yeah, I mean, they're the future. So
Yes, it's crazy that we are on the generation we're on. It's totally different subject, but when you hear your music become the oldies, it's we're getting there.
it's hearing music that I listened to in high school that I thought was, somewhat inappropriate, even when I was in high school, being played at supermarkets now is kind of like oh wow, things change.
Anything else?
Just a side note, I would like to know what age the Gen Alpha starts.
I can't give. I have to look it up online to see what
okay.
What the age
Oh,
is.
I can look it up. I just thought you knew off the top of your head.
I know that the oldest Gen Alphas are about 13 or 14.
Oh, okay.
So they're I think the newest generation, like the babies being born right now, are probably going to be part of a different generation. So if you didn't feel old before the start of this chat,
yeah, thanks.
Gen X is now 4 generations in the past.
Wow.
Sorry, I had to be the bearer of that news.
It's not a surprise.
Oh goodness.
What?
Oh my. Any other questions?
I did put into the chat for everybody, right above Linda sharing the QR code is the link to the presentation that I just gave you. You should be able to open that up and download it. Yeah, or even if you don't want to download it, you should be able to view it in your browser. And that video is on there. We covered all the topics in that video, but that might be a helpful like primer if you want to share that with other people.
Right.
And then all those links are there for further education if there's things that you want to delve more into deeply.
Right.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Lastly, at the end of that presentation is my personal email. So if you have questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking here, or if you think of something a week or two from now, and you're like, hey, can you clarify this? Feel free to send me an email. Can't guarantee that I'll answer it immediately, but I will answer it within a few days.
Do you want to put it in chat as well? That might be easier for some people.
Sure.
There you go.
I will find another topic for you to come back and speak
Oh,
on, too.
excellent news. Whether you
Don't-
want to or not.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
And on another note, I want to thank the presenter,
Yes.
not the presenter, as well as the host, Linda.
Thank
You
you.
did an excellent job. This was your first time hosting, I believe, right?
It was second time, but the first time there were no participants.
Oh no.
The tree falls in the forest, right?
Yeah, well, he went through and did it anyway, but yeah. So it was a great first run. So before people leave, in the chat, again, at the bottom, I put the course, not the proposal, I'm stuck on those, the evaluation, and there's 3 ways you can access it. One is a Word doc, one is a QR code, and one is a URL. So please do that for us before you leave or after, so that we know what you want, what you like, what you don't, what we need to change. Also, you can download the chat. You can save it if you want to, and then go back to it. And if anybody needs help doing that, just sort of scream out and we'll help you.
And we have recorded it, so we will have it available later.
There you go.
And again, for a Saturday, this is a great crowd.
It's huge. Yes, it's been wonderful.
Saturday morning at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
I had a little bit more benefit than y'all because I'm 2 hours ahead, but
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
I'm grateful that y'all were able to come, and you've been
Yeah.
a great group.
And it's very weird hearing you say y'all.
I understand.
I have been converted by the
I can
Midwest Fawn.
tell. I can tell. He's
Go
my old
Chiefs.
roommate. So yes.
Oh, wow. And Fawn, you're the one who brought him in, so thank you for that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fawn knows how to utilize her resources.
Oh, she does. It's a good thing. And you don't seem to mind being used. I'm sure you have limits.
Sure, let's go with that.
Okay. All righty, shall we call it a
Thank
day?
you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
This
you.
was great and informative. And I will talk to you in a little bit, Joseph.
Awesome.
It's weird calling you Joseph. Okay. Okay.
It was lovely meeting you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.